I wanted to give an answer to two.
Okay, yeah.
Because so to both parts, like one of the parts was like how do the discourse of power affect the role, like how do discourse of powers affect how I choose to, I guess, identify, or like how I choose to my decisions related to language. For example, I'm from Mexico and I speak Spanish, but at the same time, like part of wanting to be more Mexican is like acknowledging that like we have native languages, like we like Spanish is a language that was imposed on on people who are from the land of Mexico, and like in some sense, like because I wanna like I don't know, like get to know that part of Mexico that I like. It's not really like that motivates me to try to learn some of the native languages, like now what, or just because like I feel it's like I don't know, I could be more
more Mexican.
Yeah, more Mexican.
Okay.
I'd even add that like linguistic courses of power and how they affect how we see roles and our choice of identity. I think that really explains why a lot of African Americans like see African American vernacular English as something bad.
Yeah.
And something that we keep private. A couple of times, I've been caught and chastised for letting it slip out in public, like going out to eat with family members. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, don't talk like that in public. And I think this question speaks to the heart of that.
And for the first part, I wanted to, like, we were talking about like authenticity in language, but something I want to comment is that like I feel like speaking a language is an experience, like just by the fact that it has like different stories and like different sayings and all that stuff. So like in some sense, like if you like not speaking a language, like in some sense like you're like I could, for example, like I'm sure there's a lot of sayings in Creole or in Chinese that I just will never be aware of because I don't speak the language, and like in some sense I'm not experiencing them. That doesn't mean I'm less authentic, but it just really means that like if you like I cannot identify as Chinese because like I haven't had those experiences. And like it's not to say that should change how people identify, but like what I think does say is that like there is we cannot ignore the role that language does have in like the experience you have like in I don't know, and like for example like somebody who's like Mexican American, like even then I don't think being American in some sense like deprives you from like Mexican, like even like some of the most famous Mexican people like artists like Tigres del Norte or like Selena, like she's not from she was like from Texas but she, like everybody, like my grandma, like everybody loves her, like and I think it's part of just like how much of the quote unquote like collective experience like you have. That being said, like you were mentioning how language in some sense is a barrier, but I think parts of being a barrier means that you can it's overcomable. Like if I wanna like experience more, like I don't know, if I wanna like if I, let's say I wanna work in Haiti in the future and I wanna like not be like this like outsider, then like part of it is like me, like in that sense I'm like it's hard that I didn't experience that and I have to like learn a language, but it's part of like just because it's hard to like be two people at the same time, it's like I don't know, like at the same time like I think it's possible to like if I don't know like to I don't know like the fact that it's a barrier means that I think like it's possible to I don't know.
Yeah. In fact, to go back to the earlier case that you mentioned, the fact that there were these documentary makers from New York they were Haitians who grew up in New York and they were concerned that they didn't speak Creole, so therefore they weren't Haitians enough. But now they reached back to me last week and they want to continue the interview because now they want to ask me another question, which is that, if you're Haitians who grew up in the diaspora, how can you learn Haitian Creole? You see? So what would I suggest and what do I see as the advantage of Haitian diaspora to actually try to keep the language, actually if they didn't grow up speaking it, how can they learn it now, even if they're adults? You see, and so they echo your point, which is that you can always learn.
Yeah, and it doesn't make like the experience less in the first place, but it's just like if you wanna enhance it, not enhance it, but it's like if you wanna like listen to other people, like I don't know, if you want like there's a lot of things that you might experience, like it's not the end. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, sort of on the basis of language being an experience. So the other day, so my boyfriend is Haitian, and I'm learning Creole. This is for the people who haven't taken this class the entire semester. And we were, so that like there was a time period, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, where Haitians stopped, like compas stopped being a thing for a little bit, which is like Haitian music, and now it's becoming more of a thing, and so there's a lot of like young groups, music groups, and the main way I've been.
Some feedback about compa now.
I love compa.
But you have to explain what compa
is. It's like
I
don't know if I have an American reference. If you know what bachata is, it's like bachata, but not really. It's a partner dance. It's I can't agree with that. I'm very much invested in both.
Okay.
But there's a lot of young music groups that are producing new compa music, and the way I've been sort of learning with the absence of like time to sit down and go through a book is just by listening to these songs and like learning the lyrics. And we went through a song and it took us an hour because there were so many cultural references that there was no way, like without being Haitian or having Haitian parents, like there was no way like you would have known what it was. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but like in this whole experience of like being here and learning about Haitian experience, like there's a restaurant in Miami called Tap Tap. Didn't know a Tap Tap was a bus. That was an interesting experience. It's a bus, an open back bus. You run and jump onto it in the middle of traffic.
So our colleague who's now dead, Kenneth Hale, he said something which is very beautiful, that when the language dies out, it's like a library that's burned down, because the language is a whole library, and as you mentioned, it's a whole set of experiences that you can only really enter through the language, and so your examples are well taken. But you can enter it. You might not master all the books in the library. In fact, who can ever read? If it's a big library, you cannot read all the books. In fact, even I myself, I learn proverbs every day in Asian Creole. It doesn't end, and sometimes I learn about proverbs through other cultures. So because there are many proverbs in Haitian Creole that are found also in Africa, in West Africa, even in South Africa. And sometimes the meanings are slightly different. And sometimes you learn more about a Haitian proverb by learning it through an African. Because, that sounds familiar, and you understand better what the proverb means through the African substrate or ancestry. I think we should stop here for the discussion. Are you guys happy with? Do you have anything else that you want to add? Are the two of you?
Jonathan.
So you just mentioned that when a language dies out, a library burns out, and that language is an experience. But I'd even argue that I would have applied that same definition to identity as well. That's why I was really glad that I didn't answer the first question first. Applaud Delilah for taking the hit, because I was sitting here reading it and I was struck by it because I couldn't provide any short answer to that question. Because the notion of authenticity is really kind of vanity, and I agree with what Sophie was saying earlier. That there's a tendency to hide ourselves under these labels. And we kind of neglect our own power in the formation, maintenance, I guess, of identity, and kind of like what she was saying about wanting to sort of take and grab the bull by the horns and use her own power to forge her own identity. I think that's really everybody's responsibility.
Right. And that reminds me, maybe I should bring back this issue of stereotypes, and there's a whole new literature these days on fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So in a way, given what you just said, one can think of this notion of having identity that's fixed, pretty much like this notion of having fixed mindset. Because if you believe in fact, there's lots of research that show that if you have a growth mindset, meaning that you believe that you can actually learn new things, that you're not bounded by your previous experience. You can always go beyond that, and that requires, of course, practice, because there's nothing that's, intelligence is not innate. You can always develop more intelligence. Now, that's a big break, right, from previous literature, previous beliefs that say, well, you're born with a certain amount of intelligence. It's like height, and you cannot go beyond that. So the new literature on growth mindset versus fixed mindset tell us that we can always go beyond what we're born with, which means that our identity should not be taken as something which is given once and for all. You can always massage it, given particular context and given particular needs, right? So maybe
but
actually,
it's not like infinitely like mutable though. Like
sure, of course, yeah.
Like your skin color is like kind of fixed and like that.
Right.
Like affects how people like.
Right, but we know, but I think, but Jonathan, I don't know if you remember way back when, Jonathan gave that example of this person who was white and who claimed to be black. What's her name? She had a job in the ACLU. That was you, Jose? That was you. Yeah, so even that, because often skin color doesn't come alone, it comes with particular assumptions about skin color. Like in Haiti, there are people who look very white, but who are black. If you go back to Dessalines, to 1805, he said clearly that even if you're Polish, you're going to be black. So even back then, skin color was not determinate.
Yeah, although it's interesting because with Rachel Dolezal, I feel like most people are saying like they like don't accept her identifying as black, so I feel like that supports the idea that there's something that's kind of fixed about it.
Right. Yeah.
But I feel like that ties into what Jose was saying about, and like what you guys are all saying about like cultural experiences tying in to certain things, like it being a cultural experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just about like how, like I guess, and I, wrong or right for having this like attitude, like kind of don't feel like she. Not like don't feel like she should be allowed to, but I wouldn't want to accept her because it's like, how dare you, a person who has had no experience as like an African American, like human, like try to identify with that, and like maybe it would have been different if she had been a person of color trying to identify, like if she had been Indian or like. I'm trying to think of another, or like Filipino or something, like trying to identify as African American, maybe I would have been more lenient, but like as a privileged non-person of color, I don't know.
But it's also interesting, the idea of like when you're crafting your identity and crafting your authentic identity, what do you like, right, I guess maybe your whole identity, your like authentic identity is that you're not authentic to anything, but like when you're crafting your identity, what do you draw from? Is it like what you authentically feel as, or is it what you like authentically like have like ties to? Like I have a similar situation where like mixed Indian heritage kind of thing, and like when I'm crafting my Indian American identity, do I base it off like South Indian, do I base it off Mauritian, do I base it off like North Indian, like what do I do? But it's like do I pull from the past, or do I pull from like what I feel? And like Rachel Dolezal, her whole thing was that I feel black, whatever that means, but like where do you draw from?
And on a similar vein, it doesn't just apply to like what you identify as nationality-wise or culture-wise, because I've been so focused on being a linguist that the possibility of having a capacity and being having the intuition to be a mechanical engineer never occurred to me. But in participating with like some friends who are like creating projects, like I've been the one who to come up with like ideas that solved problems, and I never thought that would be a possibility for me because I don't like math. So it's like the identity of being a linguist was so limiting that I didn't even know I could do that. And I think that it's like along the same lines of like, are we limiting what we can be by choosing our identities as well, I guess.
That's a good question to ponder.
and yes, sorry.
No, that's good, that's very good. So I think let's stop here and just